Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. We are so glad to have you here. My name is Ryan Bonfilio, and I serve at Emory's Candler School of Theology, both as an Old Testament professor and also as the director of the Candler Foundry. The Candler Foundry is a new organization at Emory that my colleague Krista Edwards will soon tell you more about, but we are the sponsoring entity for this webinar, and we are so glad to have you here. Dr. Carter, we are so glad to engage on your amazing book, and to our panelists, Sheila and Ben, we are so glad to have you here engaging in this topic. I'm going to now quickly turn things over to my colleague at Candler, Dr. Kwok Pui-Lan, who's going to introduce the program for this evening.
Good evening. I am so glad to moderate this panel, which will discuss Carter Haywood's newest book, The 7 Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism, A Call to Action. My name is Kwok Pui-Lan, and I teach theology at Candler School of Theology. Carter Haywood and I used to teach together at Episcopal Divinity School. So I am especially glad to welcome her to this program sponsored by the Candler Foundry. First of all, I would like to invite Krista Edwards, a staff of Candler Foundry, to introduce to you the work of the Foundry. Krista.
Hello, everyone. My name is Krista Edwards. I'm so excited to be with you all this evening. I am the coordinator of media, communications, and digital initiatives for the Candler Foundry. I've been here for a year now, and I truly love this work. The Candler Foundry started as a new initiative in 2019 with the goal of making theological education accessible to everyone. The main way that we do that, and the way that I actually got introduced to the Foundry, is through courses in the community. So you'll see a link drop in the chat with our website. Courses in the community is the way that we bring theological education to everyone through 4 to 6 week courses with faith practitioners, mostly that teach at the Candler Foundry. So one of the ways that we do that is also through partnerships. So if you are at a local church or an organization and you would like to discuss different faith topics, you can actually partner with us and we will bring a course to your community. That was how I was introduced to the amazing work of Don Salyers, and I was actually able to take it while being a student at Candler with people in the courses in the community. Another way that we do that is also through our Candler in Conversation podcast. Our Candler in Conversation podcast started in 2020 as a way to just bring the Candler community together to have very important conversations about faith and theology and how we live that out in our lives. And I'm very excited to announce that we'll be bringing that back at the end of this year. And we're going to be featuring important profiles of the Candler community so that people can see what you can truly do with a seminary level degree and how that works in the public world. The last thing that I would like to talk about is Foundations in Faith and Leadership. That is our newest program that just started this year. Foundations in Faith and Leadership is a 24-week program that is open to anyone at any level to really learn how to do ministry well. It's a certificate program. We have many tracks that are open to you. The link in the chat will take you to our website with all the information, but it's basically a way for you to learn in a cohort of either people that you don't know or a cohort based on your church. And in that cohort, you would get to really study the same topic for 24 weeks with a trained facilitator who's really just there to be a guide as you think deeper and theologically as you prepare for leadership ways. And the last thing, and one of my favorites, is TheoEd. TheoEd started with Ryan and he brought it over to Candler School of Theology, and we're grateful for it. We actually just had an amazing event in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago, and you can check out our website, theoed.com, for more information. Our new talks are up and on our YouTube channel. So all the links will be in the chat. I'd love to chat with you all during tonight's event, and just happy to have you here.
Thank you very much, Krista. And now I want to tell people about tonight's program. First of all, I will ask Carter to introduce the book, and then we have two discussions. We have Benjamin Boswell, and also Sheila Mooney. I will introduce them before they speak. And afterwards, I will invite Carter to respond to their comments before opening up to your questions. And as you can see in this webinar, and down below in the menu, you can see Q&A. Please put your questions there. You can direct your questions to Carter or to Ben or to Sheila. And now let us begin. I would like to welcome Carter Hayward once again. Carter was a professor of theology at the Episcopal Divinity School in Cambridge, Massachusetts for 30 years, and the author and editor of 18 books, including the book, The 7 Deadly Sins of Christian White Nationalism that we are discussing tonight. She was one of the first women ordained in the Episcopal Church in 1974. Her primary interest in teaching and writing included feminist liberation theologies, sexual and queer studies, anti-racism, and more recently, economic and environmental well-being. Carter currently lives in the mountains of Western North Carolina, where she founded the Free Rein Center for Therapeutic Writing, and she is the vice president and religious affairs chair of her local NAACP. Carter.
Thank you so much, Pui Lan. Quoc Pui Lan is one of my theological mentors and heroes of many years, and it's a delight to be connected with you in this way. And thank you so much for having me and having Sheila and Ben as well come and join one another tonight. I've actually just taken out my watch so that I don't go on too long because I want to hear from my colleagues here. So I'm going to try to summarize in about 15 minutes what I can about this book. And if I omit things that you really want to know, I hope you will ask me in the questions and I hope we can get to them. I began writing this book with several other people, and finally it took off with me for a variety of reasons, and I wound up finishing it myself. But we began talking about it and writing right after the insurrection on January the 6th of 2021, because as Christian women, the four of us who began discussing this, we were absolutely horrified by what we saw, and we were horrified by the silence of our churches. As it happened, the four of us are white women, 3 from the South, 1 from the North, all of us Protestant, but we were all from churches that have said very little over the years about social justice, in an unequivocal, emphatic way, that this is really the heart of what the church is called to do and be in the world, is to make justice love. And so we thought, it is time for people to speak up about this. And that was the origin of this book. So what do I mean by white Christian nationalism? I'm assuming that it's probably important for me to give you the definition. I'll give you 2. One is a somewhat more detailed definition by sociologists Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry that I have relied upon in the book. They say in their book, Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States, 2020, they say Christian nationalism is a cultural framework, a collection of myths, traditions, symbols, narratives, and value systems that idealizes and advocates a fusion of Christianity with American civic life and includes assumptions of nativism, white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, along with divine sanction for authoritarian control and militarism. Put in just a few words, I would summarize that by saying white Christian nationalism means that America is meant by its founders and by God, to be a nation led by, shaped by, and accountable to white Christian men. America is meant by its founders and by God to be a nation led by, shaped by, and accountable to white Christian men. And just a little bit more about this. You may recall that Jesus said, "Render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." Well, today, dear friends, in white Christian nationalism, Caesar is God. The emperor is God. The president is God. The ruler is God. And so whatever we render to Caesar as God. Traditionally, Christians have pretty much universally believed that God or the Spirit or higher power, Jesus, our Christic power, by whatever names, is or should be our ultimate authority. White Christian nationalists have taken this most sacred of our assumptions and flipped it upside down, in which our ultimate authority is white male Christian supremacy. Everyone and everything, including our experiences and understandings of God, of goodness, of love, of compassion, of justice, have become subjected to and are accountable to white male Christian supremacy. Jesus is my Lord. Trump is my king. Caesar is God. And let me just say that I think both, for example, the failure of the United States Senate to unanimously enact voting rights legislation and the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade both reflect the power of white Christian nationalism in contemporary America. Let me say a few words about what I mean by sin here. People often will say, why are you using that as a concept? I'm not trying to be cute. I'm not trying to simply play on an ancient Christian concept of sins as understood normally as individual failures. In the traditional Christianity, sin carries a religious connotation and can be a challenging concept in much traditional Christianity because it focuses on our shortcomings as individuals. And often it is a hierarchical, judgmental, punitive notion. I am trying in this book, The Seven Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism, to reimagine sin as our collective problem, basically a systemic challenge that we all share. A friend of mine, a white South African feminist theologian, Denise Ackerman, once said that apartheid was in the air everyone in South Africa woke up breathing every single day. It affected everyone without exception, albeit in different ways, depending upon people's color, class, gender, etc. In this sense, sin, the sin that is in the air we all breathe, affects us all. That is how I would and do describe the seven deadly sins in my book. Why seven? Sometimes people say, why just seven? Aren't there more than seven? Well, of course, there could be more than seven. And it would be very interesting for congregations to wrestle with what other sins we really need to be mindful of that are in our history. But seven is a good number to begin with. And the seven deadly sins that I specifically name here are, the first is omnipotence, or the lust for power over one another, power as control. The second is entitlement, the assumption that we are entitled to whatever is best or most, sometimes only, the only right religion, the superior race, the supremacist gender, the best nation on the earth, entitled. The third is white supremacy, which particularly since the murder of George Floyd in 2020, many white churches have been wrestling with, I'm glad to say. But we have just begun, sisters and brothers, those of us who are white Christians, to begin to understand the depths and power and depravity of white supremacy in our nation and in our churches, all of our churches, liberal as well as conservative. I would also link up with white supremacy, anti-Semitism, which could very well stand as a sin of its own, another deadly sin, because it certainly is. Anti-Semitism in America, and that is a huge topic, and we all need to be mindful of that and discuss that, and we do, and I do in my book try to do that. The fourth deadly sin I list is misogyny, and I would link up with that homophobia and heterosexism, because sex and gender issues are always really inextricable from one another. And you know, we would be, I would be here for the next 20 years of my life, should I live so long, trying to unpack the extent to which misogyny has shaped Christian theology and Christian churches. Again, even the liberal ones, not just our conservative churches. Misogyny is in the warp and woof of Christian DNA throughout the world, but including America. The fifth deadly sin I name, which may be the hardest one for many congregations to deal with, particularly white congregations, but not only white congregations, is capitalist spirituality, a term that I borrow from my former partner and the great Christian social ethicist, Beverly Harrison, where she talks about the convergence of capitalism's focus on the individual's greed, really, the individual making more, greater and greater profit, and that becoming the be-in and end all of an individual white male's life, basically, in capitalist society, with spirituality, particularly the spirituality of the Protestant Reformation, that also focused on the individual. And so when you have a high individualism and you combine that with a profit motive of capitalism, you've got a deadly sin, sisters and brothers. And so the fifth deadly sin is capitalist spirituality. The sixth is the domination of the earth and earth creatures by humans. Any of these could be books and books in themselves, and study groups and study groups and action groups and action groups, countless. The seventh deadly sin is violence itself, just violence. Gun violence, war, our obsession with violence, our turning to violence as a first resort and not a last resort. Those are the seven deadly sins. I don't stop there. Every sin has there's a chapter on each sin in the middle of the book, and then the last part of the book is a call to action. And to me, that's the most important part of the book, because it invites congregations, particularly Christian congregations, and especially white Christian congregations, to really study each of these sins with an eye toward action. What are we going to do? Because if there were an eighth deadly sin, if I were to name one tonight, it would be the silence of the progressive churches. Silence. The sinfulness of our silence. We, sisters and brothers, are in danger of losing our democracy, which is our government of the people, as flawed and as frayed and as impartial as it is. There is absolutely no moral excuse for the churches to be silent in this context. And so this call is a call to action for Christian churches, however they are define themselves or would define themselves theologically or politically, more conservative, more moderate, more liberal, to get together, to do something, to get together with other churches, to get together with other faith communities. Just the other day, I got an invitation from the Brevard Jewish congregation to come and talk about this to the Brevard Jewish congregation. This is the town where Sheila and I live. And I'm delighted to do that, because I would love to see Jews and Christians and this town of ours working together on some of these sins, because they do affect us all, even if they have such deep roots in Christianity. I could say a lot more, and there may be time for me to do that tonight, and there may not be, but I want to hear from my sister and brothers and those of you who are listening and see what your questions are. So thank you for the time being.
Thank you very much, Carter. It's always good to listen to you. You have written such a prophetic book, Call to Action. At a time like this, we are remembering those who are suffering from the war in Ukraine and those who are affected by the global pandemic and also a global racism that is around us. Yeah. And now I would like to invite the first discussion, Benjamin Boswell, who is the Senior Minister of Myers Park Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a former U.S. Army officer. He is a pastor and civil rights leader who facilitates anti-racist spiritual formation courses for people racialized as white and for white predominant organizations. In the year 2021, Ben was awarded the prestigious Martin Luther King Jr. Medallion, which is the city of Charlotte's highest honor, given to a person who promotes racial equality and community service. He is the author of For the Facing of This Hour, Preaching That Resists White Christian Nationalism, and Confronting Whiteness, a spiritual journey of reflection, conversation, and transformation. So I want to invite Ben to share your comments.
Thank you, Dr. Kwok, and thank you, Dr. Hayward, for the opportunity, and thank you, Emery, for the opportunity to be here this evening. I am incredibly honored to have the opportunity to engage not only with this book, but with someone who I have tremendous respect and admiration for, and that is the Dr. Carter Hayward, who is, in my opinion, one of the most important feminist theologians of the last 5 decades, and a voice that we desperately need to hear in the church right now, and especially even in moderate and progressive churches. I want to start with this statement this evening. First of all, 2 statements. One, I cannot express my appreciation for this book more. I'm not sure I could give you all enough appreciation for, and to give Dr. Hayward enough appreciation for writing this book, for the work that it took spiritually and theologically for her to create this book and to put it out in the world. Secondarily, I don't know that I could endorse a book as more important right now for this moment. There are a lot of books that can be read about what we're facing on this side of the pandemic as we continue to face the later stages of a global pandemic. But we are at a point where our democracy is on the brink of disaster. It may already be gone and we don't know it yet. Mm-hmm. And so we are at a very precarious moment in the history of American democracy. And there are few people who are taking white Christian nationalism seriously, very few people in our country. There are even fewer people who are taking it as urgently and as seriously as Dr. Hayward is taking it. I was animated in my earlier discussions with Dr. Hayward that took place at my church, that this is one of the most important books that she has ever written, which she talks about in the introduction to this book. And I've read some of her other books, and so I see that as a massive statement, because some of her other books are incredibly important. So for her to say that this is the most important book she's ever written, to me, helps us to understand the moment that we're in. And part of what it means, in my understanding, to be a follower of Jesus is not only to understand who I am and what I'm called to do, but to understand the moment that I'm in historically and what I am called to do in this moment historically. And I think Dr. Hayward has done that very, very well. I want to begin by just offering appreciation. And as I go in offering appreciation, I'll mention some things that I think will be helpful to hear Dr. Hayward to expound upon a little bit more. I'm really grateful for the fact that Dr. Hayward has introduced us to, or reintroduced us to, the work of Dorothe Zerla and her term, particularly her term, Christofascism. The reason I find this to be very important is because there are a number of sociologists and scholars who are now writing on white Christian nationalism. In the last year, there has been just a huge explosion of research and writing on white Christian nationalism. Perry and Whitehead, Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead, who Dr. Hayward mentioned, are at the cutting edge of that. I would offer one of my close friends, Dr. Gerardo Marti, is another writing on that in that capacity. But few of them are willing to talk about this term Christofascism that we get from Zerla. Many of them want to study white Christian nationalism sociologically. And that's a very important thing for us to do. But then there's another step for those of us who are followers of Jesus, who are leaders in the church and also in the seminary and also in scholarship. We have to understand what's happening theologically and spiritually. We cannot be content only to understand it sociologically. That's not enough. And so we have to take the sociological information that we receive, and we have to then put it into spiritual and theological practice. And what Zerla has given us already is the term Christofascism, to understand the combination of a toxic form of Christianity with 20th century fascism combined together, which she saw emerging during the Reagan presidency, which folks on this call, some may not even remember in their lifetime. Others may remember very vividly. But it was a time when there was an emergence of the moral majority and a real intentional grab of power by the moral majority, a conservative bloc of Christians. This was a reactionary movement to things that were going on in America post the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement. And we now are living in the wake of this Christofascist revolution that took place in the 80s. And I think it's very important to own that term, because we are not just dealing with white Christian nationalism, which is a sociological phenomenon, but we are dealing with Christofascism as a theological and spiritual phenomenon. And we need to wrestle with that as well. And I find myself frustrated by sociologists who will not use the term fascism and who are unwilling to go that far. And I think if we're not willing to go that far, then we are at a position right now where we are surrendering the dialogue to those on the far right who want to take America to a non-democratic place. It was interesting recently, I don't know if you noticed this, Dr. Hayward, but there are now books that are being published that are defenses of white Christian nationalism. And when we get to a point where you can defend this, that makes me wonder if we've already surrendered the terms of the debate. We didn't use the word fascism from the beginning. And that's another thing I appreciate, but I'm also concerned about this book. So I'm deeply appreciative of that. I'm also deeply appreciative of the fact that Dr. Hayward moves into the territory of looking at economic justice and economic conversations, because I think those are often neglected by theologians and scholars. And one of the quotes that really I think highlights that is when she says that in this historical moment, where is the outrage of Christian churches, and who are the Christians who are speaking unapologetically on behalf of economic justice? Where are we? That was a startling quote for me to receive and to hear, and I thought it was a powerful one. And it goes back to the beginning of the book, where she talks about the unholy trinity of business, religion, and politics, and how that trinity of business, religion, and politics was really forged, I believe, not only early at the foundation of America, but forged even deeper in the 1940s, and then later as a reaction to the New Deal, and how we find ourselves today at a point where that unholy trinity has become so toxic that economic disparity in America is larger than it ever has been. And we are on a point where that economic disparity is contributing to the decline of democracy in America. Dr. Hayward also goes on to talk about how class history in America is deeply mystified. The church doesn't talk about class enough. So I can't offer enough appreciation for the fact that Dr. Hayward brings class to the forefront and talks about class intentionally. And not just talking about class, but talking about class as a white feminist theologian talking about class and the way that that makes a difference for our dialogue in the church. I would be neglecting a huge portion of this book were I not to focus on the word white in the title, which is a critical word and has animated my own personal work and scholarship. But there's a quote from the book where she says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was white." And that reminds me of a Nikki Giovanni poem. And it set off for me a conversation which Dr. Hayward has in the book about whiteness, and whiteness particularly as both a mistake and as a sinful mistake that the church must repent from. There is a way in which you could put all of these, in my opinion, you could put a lot of these 7 deadly sins under the category of whiteness and what whiteness has done to the world. So I wonder if it may be important to talk about whiteness specifically tonight, Dr. Hayward. I'll also say in my appreciation that it is incredibly radical and almost unprecedented for a liberal feminist theologian to write about sin and to write about sin so carefully. And I think we need theologians to be willing to and brave enough, but particularly those in the progressive circles, to talk about sin. I almost never hear theologians talk about sin. Reinhold Niebuhr talked about sin, and it was a renaissance for the church at that time. We need to talk about sin. If we can't frame these conversations around sin, then progressive Christians have surrendered the debate and will not have anything to discuss. So I think that's really, really important. And I want to bring this home by just saying, I think I so appreciate the way Dr. Hayward used words and made word choices. She uses things like omnipotence instead of power, entitlement instead of privilege, capitalist spirituality instead of just capitalism. So my question is, where do these terms come from? And were they theological choices that were made when Dr. Hayward made these choices? And the last thing I want to say before I conclude my remarks is to mention how deeply grateful I am for the fact that Dr. Hayward issues 7 calls to combat the 7 deadly sins, and we can get into those. One of those, the ones that's most important to me, is approaching the blackness of God. I'm deeply grateful for that. But I also want to offer that as a pastor, in addition to being a theologian, as a pastor in the local church, I was so thankful that Dr. Hayward raised up for us how reticent Christians are in this day and age to talk about social justice, and how it's necessary to understand that as a critical component of our faith. And I recently read a study this week that said that Democrats who are in churches are actually less likely now in America to care about social justice than Democrats who are not in churches. I find that to be deeply troubling. And I am so grateful that Dr. Hayward has said that the heart of what we're called to do and to be in the world is to be about justice. So thank you, Dr. Hayward, for this book. And thank you for the opportunity to engage with you about it.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Ben, for your appreciative remarks and for your work in leading anti-racist conversation among racially white people, and for also joining us tonight and raising your voice. And now I would like to introduce the next discussions. Sheila Mooney is a native of Brevard in North Carolina, and she's a member of the Transylvania NAACP chapter and chair of its education committee. She's a community leader and serves on the boards of Transylvania County Library and SAFE, which is an organization that fights domestic violence. She's an active member of Bethel A Church and is a retired school counselor and a certified trainer for Circle of Security and Resources for Resilience. We look forward to hearing from you, Sheila.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank all of you. And Carter, I have to say thank you for being brave enough to write this book and to speak the truth about white people. I really appreciate you being willing to put yourself out there and make your voice known. When you started speaking tonight, you talked about God and that we're here to make justice love. And that sounds so easy and so simple because love is the only thing that's real. And I hear you talk about God as Caesar and the president, and are we losing our democracy? For me, your democracy does not exist. For me, that democracy that those lovely founders were sitting down writing as they congratulated themselves about coming and taking this beautiful land from the Native Americans. See, all of that is so hypocritical. And that piece about power over. I mean, America was started with white men taking power over the beautiful Americans, the first Americans. So the whole country, everything is set on power over somebody. So that's why democracy doesn't exist for me. Talking about the white nationalists pick what they want out of the Bible. They base all of this on the Bible. And I do wonder what Bible they are reading from, because it's not the ones I've seen. And the government, our dear government, I believe that's just all about them forgetting that the government rests on the shoulders of God, the real God, not the God they have created, not the God that they bow down to, not the God that has the price tag on him, not the God that says who is better than the other person, not that God, the God that has all power. And it's interesting to me that white men are able to just take what they want, say what they want, do what they want, go where they want. And it makes sense to them. And they teach it to their children. And it's perpetuated every day, every day. You talked about sin in the air. Whew. Sin in the air and sin in the water for some people.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, water is not a luxury. Fresh water is not a luxury. Fresh air is not. But we're going to have the biggest and the fastest cars. We're going to make the most money. We're going to dominate everything. And this thing about always being right and changing the rules for their convenience, you know? I cannot imagine if the white nationalists really studied the word of God, what would it be? And your 7 calls to action. I want to know if you've heard from anybody that's actually putting this into practice, other than reading the book and being informed about ways to change. White supremacy. White supremacy. And there's just that whiteness that we are supposed to bow down to and look up to, and that's the goal, and that's the American dream, that the white man has said what the American dream is. For some of us, it's fresh water. For some of us, it's a safe place to live. For some of us, it's the ability to see our young boys, our young men go out for a date and come back home safe. That would be powerful. Capitalism, spirituality. It just amazes me that you put those together, because money, I just don't know where money plays a part in spirituality. But that's another a powerful example of white supremacy, how they can make spirituality and capitalism and money and power work for them. And the thing about it, Carter, is it makes sense to them. They understand exactly what they're doing. It makes sense to be able to dominate the earth, people, and to break people down in groups, black and brown, male, female, and this misogyny. I once heard, I don't know, that there's not even a word for hatred of men. But we got good old misogyny to remind us that women are less than. Even the founders, the white women were their property, and you didn't have the right to vote and speak and have property. It just amazes me that someone hasn't written this book before, that these 7 sins plus have shaped America and influenced the world. And so, Carter, I'm wondering, when could we sit and write a book about the 7 resiliencies of the people that thrive, that live in this white nationalist, white supremacist? Can you imagine living 70 years with this hanging over your shoulders, with this in the back of your mind, with this in the forefront of your mind? When you're trying to strive and set goals and reach goals and live a happy, fulfilled, healthy life in America, can you imagine fathers not knowing whether they're gonna have a decent job, mothers not knowing about basic health care, concerned about our elders that don't qualify for food stamps or decent housing, that they end up living at home because they can't afford anything else? And you talk about the violence. This violence, and that we seem to be at peace with it, that you can literally kill a Black man. You can shoot a Black man 60 plus times and get a slap on the hand. That just amazes me, that white Christians are just, as you call it, could have been the eighth sin, silence. Just could have been the silence. And they do know better. Because if this whole world was reversed, if Black and brown people were in control, if Black and brown people dominating the earth, dominating the women, telling people exactly what they could do, what would that be like? And I sure hope it wouldn't be like it is. This reality of living in America is a constant battle. And your book speaks the truth and shows it up close and personal. And I appreciate that. And I am looking forward to seeing what difference will it make. Mm-hmm. There are beautiful books written. There are powerful books written. There are strong leaders that speak up. And what has changed? Mm-hmm. The powerful has gotten even more powerful. Domination has gotten more dominant. Power is definitely the status quo, and the white men are doing everything they can to protect that, while Black and brown people are doing everything they can to survive, just to survive. And I appreciated reading the book and learning and understanding all of this. But it also makes me terribly sad that you have to write a book and then you have to give directions on how to change this, a call to action. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be some action, Carter. I mean, we have these elections coming up. We're so divided. And your question about democracy. It makes me wonder if America might be on the verge of reinventing herself. Definitely reinventing. And it scares me that it might just be more of the same. Might just be more of the same. Mm-hmm. So Howard Thurman said, it's not what is in us, but what is on us. What's on us? These 7 sins, we wear them like layers of clothing. Literally wear them. And then that's passed on to generations that follow us.
Thank you so much for sharing your comments and your remarks, for your share of the truth within from your experience, and a very astute reading of our current situation and also the past American history. I'm also grateful for your invitation to all of us to stretch our moral imaginations to envision a different world, a different United States can be possible. Now, I want to invite Carter to briefly respond before opening up to questions. And please put your question at the Q&A. Carter.
Well, first of all, Sheila and Ben, I don't even have enough words to tell you how grateful I am for your attentiveness to this, to what I've been trying to get out of this book, and your honesty and the strength and power of your remarks, both of you. Sheila, I remember in 2016, right after the election, and we were over at the Unitarian Church in Brevard, and all of us white people, most of us were white, and we were in a state of shock and horror and fear. And you were there, and you said, when you were given the mic, "Welcome to my world." I'll never forget that. In a way, that said it all then, and it says it all now, as I was hearing you, that I'm talking about democracy, our democracy being at stake, and you basically say, actually, it's your democracy. You know, some of us have never had this democracy. And I can only say that as a white sister woman in this world, I am increasingly mindful of the depths and the depravities of the whiteness that has afflicted us, not simply or primarily as a skin pigment, but as a moral construct upon which this nation was founded, and in which every other Blackness and brownness and Asianness and every other person on the planet is lower than and less than. And people like Ben and myself, white people, you know, all we can do if we are really honest is use the white power and the white privilege that accrues to us to fight like hell for some semblance of racial justice and some determination on the part of as many white people as possible to approach the blackness of God, which is what this book calls white people to do. Are we doing it? The book has been out 3 weeks as of now, and almost everywhere I've gone, people are saying, "Well, now what do we do? What do we do?" And it's easy for liberals, I guess, primarily white people, but not just white people, for liberal people, period, to write books and then have that be it. We talk about it and then we go on to the next issue. We can't. This book is a call to Christians, particularly white Christians, to do something, not just to read the book and think about whether they like it or not, or what they would argue with about a particular biblical passage, or what I've put in that was not right, or what I've put in that could be better, or whatever. All of that's true, I'm sure, but we got to do something, people. And I'm saying that everywhere I go, you know, do it and get in groups. There's more power in groups. Have churches work together. Have synagogues and churches work together. Have white churches and maybe Black churches work together on the things that make the most sense to us all, and so forth and so on. So, and it's regardless of what happened in this upcoming election, nothing foundational is going to change in this election or in 2024. Things may get harder for many of us, and especially for brown and Black people, and especially for poor people, and probably especially for queer people, and certainly for women who have any kind of issues around reproductive choice and who need abortions or who need birth control. Things are going to get harder. But the problems that this book deals with, which go way back in Christian history, are not going to get solved regardless of who wins whatever election. So we're in here for the long haul. And for me, that's all of my life. And then younger ones who come along in my family and communities will have to pick it up and make it better. Ben, you were truly a brother. Here we are in our whiteness. I don't know many white men who have as much passion as you do around whiteness and Blackness and racism, or really, for that matter, any justice matters. And you're only about half as old as I am, and I really am amazed at your youth and wisdom. Um, you're right. Approaching the blackness of God is one of my favorite parts of this book too. And we could spend the rest of our lives and through 2 or 3 lives learning how to do that, couldn't we? The unholy trinity of business, religion, and politics, more specifically of corporate America, the Christian right, and the Republican Party. Right now, as we all know, it's on the rise. The power is on the rise. The whiteness is on the rise. The maleness is on the rise. We have 10-year-olds having to go across state line to get aborted, to have an abortion after they've been raped. You know, this is, as I said somewhere the other night, this is evil. And the evil is not in the abortion. The evil is in that child's predicament. How can this be? And where are the church's voices in this regard? We have to speak. We have to speak, dear people. Christo-fascism, indeed. Dorothy Zola was spot on. And I'm glad you pointed out that to talk about Christo-fascism is clarifies the Christian context of fascism in America. It's not just white Christian nationalism. It has to do with our being Christian. And let me just end by saying, if our democracy is already gone, and it certainly is slipping away, we have to fight like hell. I would say getting it back, but I hear what Sheila's saying. It's got to make it better. It's got to make it deeper. We've got to fight for a real democracy. We're not going to leave Sheila out there. And we're not going to leave other Black and brown people. And in fact, we are all of us. We've got to work together for the justice, love for every one of us and for the other creatures, not just humans, but other creatures as well. We got Elie Wiesel, the great Jewish Holocaust survivor, once talked about our needing to recreate the universe. And we do. We need to recreate the universe. That's all I'll say. I think we've talked a lot, and I don't know that we have time for many questions. But
yes, we have a question. Now this question is: what will it take for all white Christians to accept that Jesus was homeless, unemployed, and was a brown-skinned Jew with no money, no social standing, no university degrees, and was not a member of clubs or societies, and not a political figure or a militaristic leader, but one who preached love, joy, peace, and community, and who himself died a violent death at the hands of government and church leaders. Mm-hmm. So I invite anyone of you to respond. What would this Jesus meant for white Christians? How about we begin with Ben?
Yeah. We're all looking at Ben.
This is a powerful question. And I think the first thing it would mean would be that we would have to confront, particularly people in my situation who are at the intersection of all privilege, white, male, able-bodied, heterosexual, that we would have to confront the fact that many of the ideologies we live in are lies. Particularly the whiteness that we live in is a lie. White supremacy is a lie. It's not true. White people are not superior to anyone else. And I will just give a quick story on this. One Wednesday evening during Bible study, I came into the church and I wanted to talk about Jesus. And I had a picture of Jesus, and it was the portrait of Jesus so many are familiar with a long flowing brownish golden hair turned sideways like this. And I just brought it up. I had a picture of it in front of the congregation, and I just ripped it in half.
Oh.
And I said, this is not Jesus. And I got that from Vincent Harding. Of course, I got it from a Black man who taught me things, Vincent Harding, who did that himself. And when you rip that up, the first thing that happens is white people just gasp. They gasp. They can't imagine that you would rip Jesus in half in front of them. And I just said, that's not Jesus. That's never what Jesus ever looked like. That's an invented human being that you created to worship. And it really does change the conversation. It's hard. It's a very hard thing, but we are, as white people, as white men particularly, addicted to a God that looks like us. And so, as Christina Cleveland says, and I know you know Christina Cleveland, the first step and Ebony Marshall Terman and other scholars say this, the first step is to deconstruct, and I would say even to kill. We have to kill the white male God, or we can never actually worship the real God. And that work is extremely hard, particularly for folks that look like me.
Thank you.
I remember once Desmond Tutu, who was teaching at the Episcopal Divinity School, Puilan, you remember that too, I'm sure, back in the early OOs. And he once said, he famously said, he sometimes wondered what Bible the architects of apartheid were reading, because what you said, Sheila, because it's not the Bible he was reading. So where were they getting these messages about Christ and sort of the glory and the kingship and all of this, you know, Jesus Christ and all this finery? And, you know, that's not what it's about at all. Never has been, never will be, not in truth.
And you are one bad dude. Man, I wish I had been in that congregation when you did that. Just rip. Oh, man. I just remember being a little girl, seeing that picture and thinking, I've never seen anybody that looked like that in my neighborhood. So, you know, he's up there with Santa Claus. It just didn't fit. And you couldn't ask, you know, because as Jesus, you dare not question that. But I'm going to try that and see what happens. I might have to move to Charlotte, but it'll be okay. I'll look you up, okay?
You're welcome here anytime. You're welcome here. I need to say, Sheila, quickly that hearing you speak tonight in response to Dr. Hayward's book moved me deeply. And I felt like it was like Toni Morrison and James Baldwin combined, just speaking to my heart. You were just in the spirit and speaking the truth. And the thing that continued to come up for me as not just when I was listening to you tonight, but also as I read Carter's book, was I think that the intersection of all these sins can be seen at the plantation in American life. And I think we're still living with the logic of the plantation in all of our minds and in all of our institutions. The plantation was anti-women, anti-Black people, anti-environment, anti-equality. I could go on. It was power driven. It was entitlement driven. And I see I have to admit that it was Dr. Willie Jennings who gave me the eyes to see this. So again, it comes from Black people showing me myself through their eyes. We continue to replicate the plantation logic and all the sins that came with the plantation logic over and over again, including where women are in the plantation logic, the misogyny, including where enslaved folks are in the plantation logic, and the plantation logic is the foundation of American capitalism. So here it all is together in one place. And I think about this quote from James Baldwin. He said that he says, they brought humanity to the brink of extinction because they thought they were white. And I think that that's the thing that just keeps coming up to me. And as a person who has been formed and shaped in whiteness for all my life and formed and shaped to take over whatever plantation someone else created for me, what does it mean for me to try to deconstruct that logic, to stand against that logic, to give up that power and to say, those are sinful logics, evil logics that have led to the destruction that we're in now, and how can I give them up?
Yeah, thank you very much. I wonder if Carter or Sheila has some closing remarks.
Well, what I was going to say, really in closing, is that when Dr. Kwok Pui-Lan asked me to do this webinar tonight and asked me who I would like to have as respondents, if we could get them, I immediately said Ben Boswell and Sheila Mooney. I mean, I didn't have to think about it for 5 minutes. I knew that I wanted the two of you somehow on these screens tonight with me, responding and doing exactly what you've done. I mean, you're both beautiful, you're brilliant, you're radical. I learn from you every time you open your mouths in any context. I learn something from you, and I cannot tell you how grateful I am to you. And what we do from here together remains to be seen, but I hope that we can do it together. And with you too, of course, Kwok Pui-Lan.
Sheila, any remarks from you?
Well, I'm just so appreciative to Carter. I tried my best to get out of this, but she wouldn't let me. And I think the main reason is so that I can meet Ben.
Yeah.
So, Ben, this is just the beginning. Okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We also have participants who put on the Q&A saying that we really need to do something together at a time like ours. So please join me in thanking Carter, Sheila, and Ben for their wonderful contributions this evening. And thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar tonight. Goodbye. God bless everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.